This video is sponsored by Call of War, the free online PvP strategy game where you'll choose a real country to lead during World War II. It's the darkest hours of human history and it's up to you to build a powerful army to defend the country. You'll fight up to 100 other players on historic maps in real-time games that can take weeks to complete. What I really love about Call of War is the variety of technological paths you can go down. Do you want to tank rush your enemies or keep them suppressed with your air superiority? You can even focus on the development of secret weapons like nuclear bombers and V2 rockets. It's your choice. We'll be hosting a special game with instructions on how to join at the end of this video, so make sure you stick around. Infographics show viewers will also get a special gift of 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free when they use the link. It's only available for 30 days, so click the link, choose a country, and start fighting in the ultimate confrontation right now. It was the immediate aftermath of World War II, and a large group of European citizens was being brought to the United States. But these weren't war refugees or immigrants, they were members of the Axis powers and insiders in one of the most notorious regimes of all time. So why did the United States government roll out the red carpet for more than 1,000 Nazis? It was 1945, and the genesis of what would become Operation Paperclip was starting in the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. The war was starting to wind down, with victory in Europe looking all but assured, and the US and British armies wanted to make sure that the valuable resources and innovations created by Nazi Germany wouldn't be lost with the regime's defeat. They created T-Force, a joint army mission to secure any scientific and technological targets before they were destroyed either by the Nazis or by looters and invading armies. This mission would grab rocket technology, aircraft and naval equipment, and synthetic rubber and oil catalysts. But there was another target of T-Force: people. The German war machine employed countless scientists in industrial technology, weapons design, rocketry, and nuclear technology research. While Germany lost the war due to Hitler's poor decision-making and sabotage of his own war machine, leading some of his top military men to scheme to kill him at one point, the Nazis had been in a tense race with the Americans to develop the nuclear bomb and employed some of the smartest and most dangerous scientists in the world. And the United States had a reason to get them in their custody. While the war wasn't quite over yet, the minds of many top American military experts were already turning to the war that was just around the corner: the Cold War. The Soviet Union was one of the few countries that had been on both sides of the war, aligning with Hitler and then joining forces with the Allies after being invaded by the Nazi army. And they would come out of the war more powerful and influential than ever. In the aftermath of post-war negotiations, they would gain control of much of Eastern Europe and half of the divided Germany, and would become the primary superpower challenging America. The space race was just around the corner, but first would come the brain race. As Hitler's regime fell, many of the high-ranking scientists working for the Nazi regime found themselves falling out of favor. Hitler was notorious for turning on his allies due to paranoia, and prominent figures like rocket scientist Wernher von Braun found themselves on the run and branded traitors. That created an opportunity. And on July 20th, 1945, the US military officially greenlit Operation OVERCAST, a mission to recruit German scientists and use their know-how to help end the war in Japan. It would be renamed Operation Paperclip months later, denoting the signature paperclip the officers would use to mark the files of the scientists they planned to recruit. But it was about to become a much bigger project. In 1946, the Nazi regime had scattered to the winds. Many of the regime's top officials had either killed themselves or been arrested to face war crimes trials, but the scientists were often in a gray area. Many either worked isolated from the most brutal crimes of the regime or had limited involvement. They weren't targets for war crimes prosecution, but many of them were still arrested and found themselves in military custody. That made them easy targets for recruitment, and President Harry Truman allowed for the recruitment of more than 1,000 German scientists. And they had some unintended help from Nazi Germany's leaders. After the failed conquest of Russia in 1941, Germany shifted its focus to building their technology for the war ahead. When they first instituted the draft, countless scientists and intellectuals were taken from their work and turned into genetic soldiers. This was not good for their science division. And in 1943, the head of their military research division, Werner Ossenberg, composed a list of scientists and engineers who could be more useful in research work. This document, the Ossenberg list, was later found by a Polish laboratory worker and made its way to MI6. The Allies now had a useful list of the smartest people put to work by the Nazis. But recruiting them would come with no small amount of controversy. As the full scope of Nazi Germany's war crimes became clear, many were hesitant to collaborate in any way with its architects. Defenders of the program argued that the scientists likely had little to do with the horrors of the death camps, but many scientists, including von Braun, used slave labor to build the German war machine. President Truman was reportedly hesitant to approve it, but felt that the growing threat of the Soviet Union was more important. But as they arrived in America, many of the German scientists came under new scrutiny. Had the United States made a deal with the devil? Several scientists who were brought to the United States were later accused of having more involvement with Nazis' crimes than thought. George Rickey worked as an engineer at one of Nazi Germany's largest factories and was responsible for the production of several of the country's most powerful bombs. After being brought to the U.S. as part of Operation Paperclip, he was accused of close ties with the SS and Gestapo and getting many of his workers from a nearby concentration camp. He became the only Operation Paperclip recruit to be returned to Germany for trial, and after being acquitted at the trial for lack of evidence, never returned to the U.S. But another recruit had even more shocking skeletons in his closet. Walter Schreiber was one of the later recruits of Operation Paperclip, coming to the U.S. in 1951. He gained the Americans' attention after escaping Russian custody, but was one of the Nazis' top medical scientists. He worked in medical research for the Air Force, but not long after, a shocking bombshell dropped. A Holocaust survivor accused him of being involved in medical experiments committed at the notorious Ravensbrück concentration camp. If the allegations were confirmed earlier, he likely would have been tried at Nuremberg. Instead, his career with the U.S. came to an unceremonious end, and he chose to leave for Argentina. But many of the other Operation Paperclip recruits had much more storied careers in the U.S. The U.S. military had one primary focus for their recruitment: aerospace technology. Getting better, faster, and more precise aircraft was essential for any future wars. But the focus was just as much on the next frontier. It would be only 12 years after World War II when the first satellite was launched into space by the Russians, and the space race would be on in earnest. Many of the German scientists had made massive leaps forward in rocket technology, and the government wasted no time putting them to work. It was this field where Operation Paperclip would bear its biggest fruit. Wernher von Braun wasted no time in getting to work for the United States. He had already been out of favor with Hitler and was on the run when he was captured by Americans. He would be joined by other German talents, including aircraft designer Herbert Wagner, the first scientist recruited by the program, and Kurt Debus, Arthur Rudolph, Hermann Oberth, and Eberhard Rees, pioneering rocket engineers. All claimed to be apolitical scientists glad to turn their back on Nazi Germany, although many Holocaust experts questioned that description. But the U.S. wasn't the only ones with their sights on these scientists. Starting in October 1946, the Soviet Union began their own counterpart to Operation Paperclip, Operation Oso-Aviakim, which recruited over 2,000 German scientists and specialists, along with 4,000 civilian family members. Witnesses described this operation as fast and efficient, resembling a draft more than a recruitment. A scientist named Fritz Preichgott described being rounded up by Russian soldiers with machine guns and taken to Russia to work, something he would tell to the U.S. military in 1952 after being released from his Russian duties and being recruited by the Americans, making him the only person to work on both sides of the space race. But for most of the American recruits, it would be a shocking change in fortunes. Wernher von Braun and other scientists wasted no time in getting to work for the Americans, and they proved to be worth the recruitment efforts. The knowledge of the German rocketry and airplane technology they brought with them was quickly incorporated into American designs, and many of them gained prominent positions. Von Braun worked on sensitive projects including both the American ballistic missile program and the rockets that launched the first American space satellite, Explorer 1. And an even more prominent organization was about to come calling. It was 1960, and the focus of the space race was shifting from breaching the atmosphere to putting human beings safely in space, and eventually on the moon. Von Braun was considered America's foremost expert on space technology, and his research group was incorporated into NASA. Not long after, his fellow former Nazi scientist Kurt Debus would become the first director of NASA's Launch Operations Center. Von Braun and Debus were involved in the design and launch of the Apollo program and eventually oversaw the successful mission that put Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon. But they were also involved in far more sensitive projects. The first nuclear bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were delivered in a very analog way, dropped out of manned aircraft. But as the Cold War ramped up and the nuclear arms race escalated, it became clear the United States would need a better, faster way to deliver their deadliest weapons. Von Braun quickly named Debus to organize a division on missile firing, and in the early 1950s they tested the first missiles carrying nuclear warheads, deploying the powerful weapons into the Pacific Ocean in a shocking display of Cold War weaponry. The two scientists were the crown jewels of Operation Paperclip and received surprising accolades. Both worked for the U.S. government until they retired and were highly honored by the end of their careers. Von Braun was inducted into the National Academy of Engineering and received the National Medal of Science. Debus had an award named after him after the National Space Club of Florida, and even had a lunar crater named after him. Many scientists believe they helped the United States in the race to the moon. But for many people, they never quite outraced their past. The question of the guilt of the Operation Paperclip scientists has been debated for a long time, with von Braun and Debus getting extra scrutiny. While Debus mostly worked in flight tests and rocket research and sought out US forces on his own, many say that no one in the Nazi war machine didn't benefit from the regime's extensive use of slave labor. Von Braun is a more controversial case, running large factories that were heavily staffed by slave labor. While he wasn't directly implicated in any war crimes, survivors who were forced to work for him spoke of the harsh treatment they experienced. There were many skeletons in the closets of the recruits, and some came out long after the fact. Arthur Rudolph was one of Germany's top rocketry engineers and a close ally of Wernher von Braun. Much of his work took place at the Mittelwerk factory, a notorious site staffed by prisoners from the Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp. He eventually defected to the US and British forces and was incorporated into the post-war US team, despite concerns over his background check, which described him as an enthusiastic Nazi loyalist. He worked on both the US ballistic missile program and on the Saturn V rocket under von Braun. He was highly decorated and considered one of the program's most successful recruits, but his story would have a much darker ending. It was 1979 when Eli Rosenbaum, who worked in a US office investigating Nazi war criminals, came across Rudolph's name in a book. It described him as a frequent user of slave labor, and research indicated that he had been involved in the abuse of prisoners. Rudolph was called in for an interview and interrogated on his past actions and loyalty to Nazi Germany. It was decided that in exchange for the government not prosecuting him, he would give up his US citizenship and return to Germany. In 1983, he left the United States, becoming a black eye on the face of Operation Paperclip. The program's legacy remains complicated even today. The scientists of Operation Paperclip are all long gone. None were young when recruited, and most died before the dawn of the 21st century. But they built much of the infrastructure of NASA and the United States ballistic missile program, and many are uncomfortable with that. When a major news outlet posted a tweet referring to Wernher von Braun as a brilliant German-American rocket engineer, no shortage of angry people on Twitter reminded them that he was in fact a Nazi. The Cold War made for unlikely allies, few more unlikely than the 1,600 scientists and engineers recruited by the US military. But history moves fast, and many people were willing to look past their actions in the last war if it meant winning the next. Thanks again to our sponsor Call of War, the free online PvP strategy game set during World War II. We've set up a special game for our viewers. Click the link in the description, create an account, and enter the game code Infographics and password Infographics to join today. For more on the aftermath of World War II and the fate of the Nazi regime, check out what actually happened to Nazi leaders after World War II, or check out this video instead.